Jane Austen's Emma is a revolutionary novel, I think, but it may seem odd to use that adjective, revolutionary, for a book which clearly, in terms of its content, is not radical at all. A courtship story set in an English village. But in terms of its narrative technique, it really is revolutionary, audacious, experimental, like nothing except perhaps Jane Austen's own novels that had gone before it. Because what it does is it tells a story in the third person, but bends it through the lens of its heroine's consciousness. So everything we are told in Emma, outside two particular chapters which are not narrated from her point of view, is shaped by Emma's prejudices, her wishes, her false assumptions. So it's a novel which actually perfects what we have come to call free indirect style, where a third person narrative is told through the consciousness of one or other of the characters involved. And actually that very term, free indirect style, wasn't invented until the early 20th century. Jane Austen didn't have a sort of terminology for what she was doing, but clearly she was very, very conscious of it, because she makes us share her protagonist's mistakes in a very calculated way. And she writes sentences, therefore, which, although very simple in terms of their diction sometimes, are sentences which no other novelist could have written before her. Take a simple example. Early in the novel, in chapter 10, Emma is trying to manufacture a one-to-one encounter between Mr. Elton, the rather oily and insinuating vicar of Highbury, a single man, and Harriet Smith, who is Emma's 17-year-old, rather pretty but foolish protege, her stooge, really. And Emma wants to make a match between these two. And as any discerning reader will know, this is she's intending a match which is not very likely. Mr. Elton is clearly more interested in Emma and is nice to her friend only for Emma's sake, but Emma doesn't see this at all. Anyway, they're out walking, Emma and Harriet Smith. They bump into Mr. Elton in the lane. Emma breaks her own lace of her boot in order to have to go into Mr. Elton's house, the parsonage, to repair it. And while she goes off with the housekeeper to do this, she leaves Mr. Elton and Harriet alone together. And she fondly imagines this will be an opportunity for Mr. Elton to pop the question, because they've never been alone together before. And she makes as much noise as possible, so that it's clear that she won't ever hear what they're saying, and she stays away as long as possible. Eventually, she has to go back into the room. And she goes back into the room, and the novel says, the lovers were standing together at one of the windows, full stop. It's a very simple sentence. But of course, it's a mad sentence. They're not lovers at all, Mr. Elton and Harriet Smith. But the narrative behaves as if it can only see things through Emma's eyes. So Austen says the lovers were standing together at one of the windows. In fact, we will find out that not only are they not lovers, but it turns out that Mr. Elton actually despises Harriet Smith, who is a nobody, who, as far as he's concerned, is far below him. It's a very simple little example of a technique used brilliantly and in an extraordinary way throughout the novel, where we cannot escape the grip of the heroine's view of the world. And novelists ever since have exploited free indirect style for in all sorts of ways. But really, Jane Austen was the first one to discover its potential. I think one of the most audacious and experimental aspects of Emma is the novel's representation of speech. In fact, of monologue as much as of dialogue. There's one extraordinary example of this that comes from the mouth of Mrs. Elton, all of whose speech is, I think, delicious, although a torture to Emma when she has to listen to it, but a pleasure for the reader. And at the Donwell Abbey strawberry picking party, dictated by Mrs. Elton, but arranged by Mr. Knightley, in whose garden it all takes place at high summer. There's an extraordinary paragraph of direct speech where Mrs. Elton is speaking, and punctuated only by dashes, we're given a paragraph of a monologue of hers, where she is taken in the course of a bit of speech which it takes perhaps 30 or 40 seconds to read, from initial enthusiasm for strawberry picking to sunstruck exhaustion at the end of the paragraph. And we're told that this bit of speech lasts, in fact, about half an hour, but it's given us a sort of capsule monologue in the novel. And I always think if it came in a bit of in a book by I don't know, James Joyce, people would look at the extraordinary narrative technique which allows us to experience half an hour's trajectory of speech in such a short period. But because it's Jane Austen, it's as if nobody really notices how audacious the technique is. And it's a technique which is elsewhere applied, most memorably to the speech of Miss Bates. I think Miss Bates is an extraordinary character, or rather, her speech habits are extraordinary. She speaks in monologues punctuated by dashes, and it's a torment to those who listen, particularly to Emma. But if the reader pays attention, you can hear all sorts of extraordinary telling information about what's really going on in the novel, what's really going on in the village, what's really going on in the romantic lives of some of the characters, in the clues given in Miss Bates's monologues. And early on in the novel, Miss Bates's monologues are literally monologues. But Jane Austen very, very cleverly does this thing where you've got used to the idea that Miss Bates speaks without interruption, without giving pause for anybody else to intervene. But actually, as the novel goes on, her monologues turn into representations of something more extraordinary. And particularly when you get to one of the great episodes in Emma, the ball at the Crown, Miss Bates's monologues, if you look carefully, you realize are representations of exchanges that are going on around her between other characters whom you never hear, other interjections, other speakers, but those have, as it were, been faded out by Austen. So all you can hear is Miss Bates, and you have to infer what exchanges she's having with other people in the room. And as ever, Austen's expecting the reader to be thoroughly ingenious in the way that he or she does that.